In talking about application to study area in part 2, then, we're going to make sense out of the material that I just talked about in terms of applying the factors to our study area. This map shows something called source intensity. This is the percent of a given hydrologic unit. Again, these smaller areas inside of the black lines represent essentially discrete watersheds within the larger landscape. And what this is a measure of is the amount of the upland area that is contained with contaminant sources. It's a product of the urban source map and the agricultural source map added together, and talks about what is the area of those sources relative to the total area of the hydrologic unit. So we can see variability from low source intensity to high source intensity. Here they've been categorized into 3 levels: high, moderate, and low. And as it turns out, the red areas correlate very nicely with the location of urban areas in the watershed, and the green areas correlate very nicely with the location of extensive tracts of forest in the landscape. So we can see then that in this particular study area, where we have a high level of urbanization with agriculture, as well as agriculture, we're going to see a high amount of contaminant source generation. And where we have areas with low urbanization, not much agriculture, more forested landscapes, we're going to have a low intensity of sources. So the red areas are high potential contaminant source generating areas. The green areas are potentially low contaminant source generating areas. This map shows buffer capacity. This is the capacity of the buffers in between the upland areas within each of the sub-watersheds, the capacity of those buffer zones to mitigate the flow of contaminants from upland area into bottomland areas. And again, here we can categorize them into 3 classes. The green represent high buffer capacity. They have a large capacity to buffer out contaminants before they are discharged into bottomland areas. And the red areas represent low buffer capacity. So we can take these 3 parameters, the parameter of source intensity, buffer capacity, and sink resistance, which is a measure of the capacity of bottomland areas to accommodate the contaminants that make it into them from the upland source areas. So we can begin to see a correlation then between areas that are green on the sink resistance map versus areas that are green on the adjusted buffer capacity map versus areas that are green on the adjusted source intensity map. And we can begin to actually characterize, based upon those 3 parameters that are derived entirely from mappable dimensions in the study area, we can begin to come to some management conclusions about areas that have the highest susceptibility for surface water contamination. And we can adjust our landscape plans accordingly and treat the landscapes differently because they are performing hydrologically quite differently depending upon cover conditions, soil conditions, and slope conditions. Thank you very much.